My favorite spot that he just stands up, takes the mic off, and just drops it, and walks off like.
Hurt your equipment?
No, it didn't hurt the equipment. We checked it out. It was fine, but it's still just like, and I'm done. And walks away.
Everybody has an attitude, not a problem. Like I told him the other week when I was going to the hospital, yeah, I got an attitude, but you better be thankful if I ain't got my M16 with me. Actually, I'll all use some. I went in there about 1:30 in pain, and they could.
Family home, his mother's home. It's the 19th of August, 2006, and I'm interviewing. Just a second. I'm interviewing him for the African American Presence in the Ohio River Valley Oral History Project.
His name, please.
I said it. Just asking. Can you just spell your name?
Glenn, Glenn. Last name is Barnett, spelled Barnett.
Okay. All right. Can you tell us where you were born and who your parents are, and give us a little background?
Yes, ma'am, I can. I was born in this house. The room right upstairs above your head. Born there January the 9th, 1947. My parents are Alice Maxine Allen, who married Glenn Warren Barnett, my father. I'm the first of 5 children.
And who are your siblings?
Following me was my sister, Sharon Ray Barnett. Next child after her was a brother, Meredith Lee Barnett. Following him was another brother, Robert Neal Barnett. And the last, a brother by the name of Michael Allen Barnett.
What are some of your early memories of growing up in this house or living here? What was it like?
Real fond memories and fun memories. This family house that dates back to 1889 and a family cemetery right across the road. And I grew up with all the history and family members. My father's brothers and uncles who grew up here before me. And his cousins and great uncles. The place here is called Barnett Ridge. It's named after my great granddaddy, James and Peter. Actually, Peter and Joseph. James was a brother that came along with them.
Was it James and Joseph, your great-grandfathers?
My grandfather, the house that owned this and built this particular house in 1889 was Joseph. His daddy was Peter. He had a brother, James. James was a brother of Peter, the father. Joseph is usually thought as of the person in which they named the ridge after. Joseph and his father and his brother Benjamin bought the first 100 acres, and this sets on that. And before Joseph had died, he had accumulated 743 acres in Barlow Township and Dunham Township, which was the centerpiece of. So growing up here, I did all the things and remember all the things, family history, and I'm growing up a farm boy. We farmed. This was a working farm.
What kind of animals or what kind of things did you farm?
It was a family farm, and that meant that they had numerous income streams, if you will. They had beef cattle. We had a dairy and sold milk. We had 400 some chickens. We sold eggs, had an egg route, a weekly egg route in Belpre, Ohio. We raised all of the things that we refer to as truck gardening and sold tomatoes, potatoes, cabbage, lettuces, peppers, corns of all types, popcorn, sweet corn, and so forth. Beans, peas, nuts, from black walnuts to hickory nuts to hazelnuts, among many other things. And then all kinds of small animals, dogs, cats, and the variety of things you find on a farm, horses, We farmed with horses when I was younger. Can remember those. Matter of fact, I remember old Bob quite well. Old Bob they put me on his back at Nettie Payton's across the way, and I was to bring the horse home. Of course, what really happened was the horse brought me home. They brought me across the ridge and here, come up to the gate and stop and waited for my mother to come out and take me off and give it an ear of corn. And then, of course, I can remember the first time we got a tractor. We had a cub, farm all cub. Went from the cub to an A, went from the A to, I believe, a Super C, and then to an H and an M.
What is that?
Those are farm all tractors in various sizes as they progress, as they get larger and bigger, that we use, equipment we use to farm with.
And did you did you drive the equipment?
As soon as your leg was long enough to engage the clutch completely, father taught you how to drive. So all of the siblings, all of us learned to drive, including my sister, as soon as we were big enough to physically do it.
I was going to ask you, how young were you when you started having some responsibilities on the farm? What types of things did you do?
I'm not sure when the responsibilities came along, and I don't always recall some of the things I've been told, but I understand at 2 months old, I was on a blanket laying out in the hayfield under a tree as my father and mother put up hay. Of course, I also was told that my mother was 9 months pregnant with me when she was helping put up hay, so I suppose I started before I got here, to some extent. But as soon as you were old enough to physically do anything, if it's to carry milk or feed the animals, feed the rabbits or whatever, you were expected to do it. Of course, you did it with the immediate supervision of an adult until they determined that you were big enough to do it without that supervision. So I can't tell you an age. At the time I was 6 or 7, I was doing a number of things that kids just don't do today.
You've probably done the most extensive research of your family, and you've really gone back and found a lot of information. Maybe we can start with just that, because you in particular have a lot of information.
Well, there's basically 2 or 3 major mixed blood groups that our families come from, and they migrated here, and most of them came here in the early 1840s. Okay, from 1830 to 1850. The Barnett clan itself came from a city named after the Black Queen of England called Charlottesville, Virginia. They owned what I suppose you call a plantation. We call it a farm, and that farm physically laid up against Monticello, the 3rd president's property. That particular farm is referred to today by the researchers as Free State. I had the privilege a few years ago to go down and meet a gentleman by the name of Bob Vernon, who has some connection with University of Virginia, works for the federal government like myself, that had done some work on our family history based on the cemetery there, and he was fighting in the courts to stop a supermarket from being built over top of the item. Depending on how you look at it, whether you won or lost the court case, what ended up happening was that the court forced the builders to relocate the graves, and those graves were some of my folks from that period. One of the stories I like to tell about those graves are that many of the caskets they raised and to move had glass inside of them. And I point out to people, do you have any idea what kind of financial and social position you had to have in the 1830s to put that kind of money and that kind of pompous in the ground? So these folks were people of means. Great-granddaddy in 1894 gave an interview to the Tri-County Reporter here in Columbus, and from that interview, these are some of the things I learned and some of the leads I got to go start finding other documents to support or to corroborate what he was saying. Granddad was one of 9 who left Virginia, old Virginia, and came through what is now Wood County, West Virginia, and came into Ohio. He says the reason they left was that about 11 years prior to that, there was a black mystic preacher by the name of Ned Turner who killed numerous whites and caused the white population to put together militias and change the rules for people of color who owned property and who lived there. One of the things they did, they started enforcing a 1793 law that required all people of color, natives, mixed bloods, mulattoes, octrons, whatever label they gave them, to obtain freedom papers from their local townships and counties and to carry those papers with them at all times. What was happening when they were refusing to let people of color who have left the state to come back in the state and not letting any immigrate under the idea that they would bring information and ideas that were counter to the slave system that they had. Basically, Granddad said that in the last year they were there, they raised 250 bushels of wheat. And in order to market that wheat, they had to travel 40 some miles in wagons. And before he could do that, he had to go, quote, to some white man to get a piece of paper to tell some other white man that the wheat in which they had was theirs and not purchased from some slave who had stole it from his master. And Granddad felt that was the last straw. So when they went to Augusta, Virginia, or Staunton area, and they sold their wheat, they went back to Charlottesville and Scottsville, the area in which the family came from, sold their share and their interest in the property, and bought, as Granddad said, bought canvas and went west. On October the 27th, 1845, they crossed the Ohio River out of Wood County, Virginia, into Washington County, Ohio, with only 75 cents left among the 9 folks. He said that for the last time, they had their wagons searched and produced their papers to prove that they were free, and came into the free territory. Now, the free territory wasn't all that free. When they got here, the state of Ohio had a law that said people of color, and only people of color, who migrated into the state, in order to stop or travel through the state, they had to post a bond or satisfy the local officials that they would not become a burden upon the state. So Granddad said after being pitched their tents and been there 3 days somewhere in the area of Belpre, the authorities came around. Granddad said something else that was strange that I don't quite understand. He said in that 3-day period of time, they had numerous people come around who wanted to see them as an oddity. And I don't know why they were so odd, whether it's because they weren't like the Europeans that others seen, and they weren't like the Africans. I'm not sure, but there was something that was a carnival-like atmosphere. Granddad mentioned a couple of times about people coming around to gaze upon them and to marvel at them. Anyhow, when the authorities came around and asked that they post a bond, Granddad said they wanted $1,000. Now, I understand the law from research. The law was a $500 bond per head, so I take it that the $1,000 was $1,000 for the 9. Then I assume, like today, local officials have a certain amount of leeway or authority in how they interpret what has to be done. Anyway, Granddad didn't have the money, obviously, and he says in his papers that he went to a Mr. Gross, who belonged to the same religious order that he did. And Mr. Gross said, "Get in my wagon and go with me." And Mr. Gross took him to a place who he said was owned by T.B. Hubbard, whatever that was, and so on, now occupied by some other name, and that other name I don't recall. And the now occupied by this other person meant at 1894, when Granddad is given this statement, that person owned T.B. Hubbard's old place. Don't recall the name at the moment. Anyway, what took place there was a contract drawn up between Granddad and the farm owner that he took him to lease the farm for a 2-year period of time, making them non-indigent, therefore not having put up. So therefore, that's where he went. Within the next 2 years, he had created a relationship and developed enough down seed money that he had, I think he said the Green family, or somebody who was a close friend of his, loaned him the difference between what he had and what he needed to get the first, him, his father, and his uncle, to buy this first 100 acres. And from that point on to the day he died, he accumulated the 743 that I spoke of. So that's how the Barnetts came into this valley. At that same time, the Mayles, the Daltons, the Crostons, the Parsons, and others from Barber County, West Virginia, which was Barber County, Virginia at that time, traveled into the same valley because they were having the same problems in that part of Virginia, being people who were of color. These whole groups had married a number of the women, and that's where the color came in. These were European men basically having women of color, native mixes, that they had married and had offspring by. They brought those brown skin and offspring to the Ohio Valley. That's where the Mayles and the Barnetts and the Gibsons and the Goings all came together and married into it. Some in other little mixed blood communities like here, like Taylortown or Kilvert, as they call it nowadays, or Rainbow or Cutler. These were all towns where you'll find these names and these families because they came here and married in and brought their tribes and groups with them. So that's generally how my families got here. My father, unlike most of the clan, like his brothers and so forth, who married back into the tribe, they married the Kennedys and the Goingses and the Crostons and so forth. My father was one that married outside. Now, when I say outside, doesn't mean that he went into the European community, because he didn't. He went to another clan that my mother come from and married her and brought her in here, and she comes from a similar type of background. They came into the Proctorville area, or Burlington, Ohio, because their great-great-grandparents had a slave master that set free and implemented over 400 of them, and they came to Burlington, Ohio. And that group, which is my mother's mother, married into my mother's father's people and my mother's father's people, who came from another clan, mixed bloods, who have a very similar history and came west very similar. And that's how I ended up being born in this house.
What's your mother's maiden name?
Allen, A-L-L-E-N.
Sorry, give the keys. It's raining and the windows are down. So.
Cut the tape off. Want to cut the tape off? You can go ahead.
Cut.
Okay. Yes, come on through.
Allen's side.
It's on. You were telling us about how your family got here, the Barnetts. How did they come, how did your granddad get the land, 100 acres?
He bought it for $500.
Did he, do you know who he bought it from?
Yes, I do. Some of the land, it all wasn't bought from the same person. The piece we sit on now, he and can't remember his associate. He and this man went in together to speculate on land. The first 100 acres was bought by Granddad, his father, and his father's brother. The second piece over here was speculation that was tied. He bought with another guy and then bought the guy out. I can't recall off the top of my hand who the owners were prior to. Some of the family members I can. For instance, my father's father was Talmadge Barnett. Talmadge's mother was Nan Nail, who married her maiden name was Mayle. Her dad was Adam Mayle, and her mother was Mary Ann Hill. Adam and Mary Ann Hill bought 40 acres of the land that I now own, that was at one time a part of my granddaddy's 700 some acres, from Mr. Hulbert. I think it was Joseph, if I remember correct. Mr. Hulbert died during the Civil War, and they bought it out of his estate. Now, as a side note, that Mr. Hulbert is a direct relationship to her husband, okay? That's not the only way I'm related to her husband, because I'm related to him also to the Adamses and also to the Mayles, but I'm also to the Hulberts. And that's who we bought some of the land was here from, and they were a part of that group that came out of Philippi and Barber County, West Virginia here.
Tell me about the travels of Mr. Holbert and how it relates to your great-granddad, I guess, Mr. Talmadge. Did they come into this area at the same time?
No, Talmadge is my granddad.
Okay.
Talmadge's father was Joseph, and Joseph is the one who bought the land, bought all the land, and that accumulated the 743 acres. But what I thought was kind of ironic is that Joseph's wife was Nan Mayle, and that was Adam Mayle and Mary Ann Hill's child. And they're the ones that bought, her parents were the one that bought the piece of land that I was mentioning, the 40 acres just up here that I currently own as a part of the 105 acres I bought a couple years ago. That at one time butted right up against the 743 acres that Granddad owned, which started at their property line, went through here and crossed this township line into the next township, which is the place that you may recall is the old Frank Mayle place next door in the next township. Of course, Frank Mayle came from out in Barber County area, and he married Joseph's sister, Lucretia Barnett. Now, obviously, they got the land because of Joseph's manipulation.
About what year, I know you said your granddad came into the area about the family came about 1830 to 1850.
October 27th, 1845 is the date that they set across the river and became permanent residents of this county.
Okay.
There's enough oral history to tell us that that was not the first trip of Peter, their father, to this area. We believe, the oral history is, that he came here as a young soldier with the militia out of Virginia at about 15 or so. And this is a number of years later when he's an old man, they're coming back through here, headed west, a free state property development. I think the Mayles and so forth probably came this way, other than because of the racial tensions and so on, is they were also following their trade, because the Martinis and the Mayles were basically stone cutters, and they were stone people. And you got the grindstone here. This valley is known for the sandstone grindstone that dates clear back to when Marietta was settled. And like this particular house we're in here now, all the basement stone that you see here was quarried right down over this hill. The current property that I bought a couple of years ago has one of the large quarries that's still open on the far northeast end of it. So there was more than one force causing the migration.
And I just want to make it clear, the people who crossed the river in 1845, that was Peter's family?
That's right. That was Peter, his brother. It was Peter, his brother James, his son Joseph, and sisters Lucretia, Mary Ann Francis, brother Benjamin, and for the life of me, I can't figure out how many I've told you and how many more there are, but there was the total group totaled 9 in that crossing.
And you think Peter may have come here before with the
Military.
militia to fight the Indians? Why did Peter come with the militia?
Not sure what the militia was doing here. I have no idea. I assume they were dealing with Native Americans. The reason I would assume that all of these families, like James Mayle, Adam Mayle's dad, came here scouting for the United States Army, and he ended up marrying one of the other scouts' daughter, who was a Native American and that's James's line. In that same group married into, and carries a Dalton name, the O. Henry, who fought with Wilmer, James's other brother, in the Revolutionary War. They came to what is now Wheeling and came south to Graves Crossing for the fort there. And when they reached the fort had been burnt, and they headed back up the river, back to Wheeling, and in the bend of the river, they got attacked by Native Americans. Now, the reason I tell you these stories, this is the military records and the records of the history of the time, but these are all family members who married, whose kids married into their kids. And all these families are my bloodline that come here. And I was going to tell you an interesting story about Mary Ann Hill, who was Adam's wife, the mother of Nancy, the mother of my granddad, Talmadge. Her grandmother in Albemarle County sued for her freedom from slavery. And what she established in court through records and testimony is that her grandmother and her grandfather, Chauncey and James, were either bought or stolen by Henry Clay when he went across the Blue Ridge and picked up and brought back to his plantation. Her siblings, being much older, at an early age sued to get their freedom. And when he saw the handwriting on the wall, because the laws in Virginia said to be a chattel slave you had to be an African, and they were not, then he picked her up and had her, as a very young girl, skinnied across the mountain and hidden in another one of his plantations. And it wasn't until she was an old woman and had grandkids that she decided the only way that she could assure, and this is about the 1700s, about the time, or the 1800s, about the time that the Barnetts and them all started to migrate in this way, she decided that she could not assure the freedom of her children and her grandchildren without going to court. So she did and got her freedom. Now, that is the connection between the Goingses. Her mother was Hannah Finley, but her daddy was Jason Goings. And that's the connection between the Goingses in Albemarle County and the Gibsons in Albemarle County that migrated to Washington County about the same time as the Barnetts. They were related and knew each other down there. What's stranger is that the woman, Mary Ann, she didn't come that route. She married and went to West Virginia and produced kids, and her kids, my great-great-grandmother and them, came here. So all of those groups are genetically related. They're married and they had kids among them, and they date clear back to at least 1710. We believe the Barnetts, the name Barnett comes from a lady by the name of Mary Barnett, who was an indentured servant, a quote-unquote white woman who worked for, I can't remember the name of the man who held her indentured, but in Spotsylvania County, Virginia. She had 3 children by, quote, a Negro man. What we know about this Negro man is that he had another family, and that he had these 3 children by her, and then he was from the IBM Peninsula. What we believe is that his family was a part of the Sephardic Jews who were moved out of there in the 1500s. That section of the family went to Dover, England. Spent a couple years, didn't find it any better there, and they came to the New World. Now, what's kind of ironic about that is that the Anna Dalton, who's the mother of Henry Dalton, she came from there, where the court had sentenced her to the New World because she was pregnant out of wedlock. Henry was born on the ship on the way over or just after they got here. Henry was listed when birth as a mulatto, as a person of color, which tells you that the father, at least, was a person of color in England. Not only did she come from there, but the Mayo family, Wilmer, his wife Mary Cockett, and the 9 kids that came, they came from there too. I believe the evidence indicates or makes you suspect that these people all had some kind of connection out of the same kinds of community, moving from there to here. In other words, they're probably of the same caste, race, and whatever that was in that period of time. They found a need to leave where they were to find a place they could live.
What, I just had one question, and that was just about the manumission papers, that, and how you found them, or how you found out about them.
My mother located this. My mother was big in a historical society, and some of her friends were cleaning up the courthouse, and they come across it, and they recognized that it was related to my mother's family and offered it to her. And from that point, I got it, and I've reproduced it, made sure every member of the family has a copy thereof. And each one of those 9 members had a piece of paper. That's why we know a lot about them, what they look like, where they come from. Those papers were created in Albemarle County, Virginia. They were placed on record again in a court in Augusta County, Virginia, which Staunton, I believe, is the county seat. And that was en route coming here. And that means that they came across what is now 250 and came through Barber County, West Virginia, Philippi. Kind of odd, ain't it? See how all the evidence starts, all the information starts to come in together? Why that route? Why not the lower route like the Goings is through or like my mother's people through South Point, or like the Goings is through the Galloping Police. Gallipolis, through Gallipolis in there. No, they came through Barber County. That's otherwise back up and across the mountains and back here. Why? Because they knew somebody in that route. They had places to stop and people to depend on in travel. You got to remember, people of color were not, well, first of all, nobody in those days had motels and hotels. Roads weren't all that good. And people of color had to have connections. You had to have places to swap, barter, buy, sleep, put up your tent in peace where you could feel safe. So I think that answers why they came across 250 and through Philippi. They had people, they knew family. They had family there.
Did the people who came here through the northern route, let's say, they had connections? Do you know if any of those connections were people who helped others who were not free? Say, do you know of anybody in the family who might have been conductors?
No, I've never heard anybody in the family ever speak of being a part of or involved with the so-called Underground Railroad. What I suspect, based upon the time period, you got to remember this is 1845. The Civil War didn't start to 1860. So we're talking about a time when things are starting to, that's one of the reasons they moved, whether the push for freedom and the impossibility of holding a handful of people holding a whole bunch of people slave wasn't going to stand. I believe that mixed blood folks were, as, to put it politely, socially conscious as white folks. There was no reason. Matter of fact, especially out of Barber County, they killed people over trying to classify them as Negroes. So they had no association if they could help themselves from. They did not want to be considered a part thereof, nor would they associate with, because it might seem that they were a part thereof. So I think there's a lot of reasons why you won't hear the Barnett family, the Mayo family, the Lucas, Daltons, Crosters, or any of them being involved with supporting people that weren't family. Now, did they help family members? Yeah, they had family members who were being looked for by the law for killing people, and they helped them right on out to California. And we got records of that. We got court records of that, where they come back 40 years later and held a trial and couldn't convict the individual. And we all know that he changed his name from Mayo to Pritchard, and he shot a school teacher and killed him out there over integration of the schools. And when I say integration of schools, it's because the white population wanted the Guinea schools to be black schools, and they didn't want to be black schools, and they didn't want black teachers, and that was all they would relegate to them. So what ended up is that their darker family members from Ohio, the Barnetts and the Mayos and so forth, went back and the Adamses, who had college degrees back when most white folks didn't have it, and they taught there, and still until this day are prominent players in the school system there.
You touched up on it a little bit of the next question I'm going to ask you. What were some of the incidents, say in Barber County, Philippine, that relate to what you just said? Do you know any other stories where the family protested their identity and had confrontations with the, say, the quote-unquote white race?
Yeah, I suppose there's dozens of stories have been told. Some have big picture implication and others just individual happenings. I don't know any at the moment. Talk about what you do see, I think maybe that you might be alluding to, is the division in the family. Early in times, the browner groups, the people who physically could be looked at and determined they weren't white. That doesn't mean that they were black. That's another misassumption. But they looked at them and said, well, these are not white folks. Well, they came west. They came, they got better educated, they came and owned property, they became parts of the pillars of the community. They founded churches here. The Males and the Barnetts and the Adamses are major players in most of all the Methodist and Presbyterian, it's basically Methodist churches here in Zanesville and Muskingum County, in Morgan County, in Meigs County. Many of those folks have crossed the color line. Some left here, went on to Michigan, where were the old settlers in Romney in that area now. But yet today, and I go visit now and then, and because of our internet connections, our email and family website connection, the younger generations who have been a second, third, and fourth generation across the color line have come back in to meet their darker cousins. So we all know each other. But even yet today, when you go out there with the old folks, there's very much a division based upon your skin tone, your hair grade, and where you could fall in that old rule order of what side of the line you fall on. So you still see it today. I honestly don't see it so much with the kids. That's not the only thing that's changed. That particular change I find palatable. Some of the other changes, having kids out of wedlock and a whole bunch of other things, I don't find palatable. They've taken on some of the worst values that they could, along with some, accidentally, I think, some good values, where they're not so concerned about the skin color and the hair grade. But I wish they were a little more concerned about the character and the education of the mates and stuff they're picking, and they're just simply not doing it as well.
Speaking of that, tell us something about your career. What was the driving force behind what you did with your life? Can you just give us
Lord knows I don't know yet today, and I'm in my 60th year. But I can tell you some of the things I'm sure that influenced it. Listening to the earlier interview with my cousin, she was very knowledgeable and so forth about her mother's side, but I thought, well, you're forgetting that your father's side, all of his brothers sent kids to OU. At one time, I think our family at one graduation had 7 Barnetts getting degrees at the same time. That's her father's brother's kids and all that bunch. So
what names were some of those kids?
Jim's kids, I don't know, I can't remember. There was Bernard, who's dead now. There was 7 of them. There was Jim's kid, the ladies, Pauline. God, I have to get my book. I can't do the names. But my point being here is that both sides of the family, and all the families we married into, like my mother's family. My mother's got a medical doctor, a dentist for a brother. The lady you just interviewed, she didn't tell you on screen, she's got a doctor for a son. I got a sister who's a law professor. I got a brother-in-law who's a dean of law. My point being with all these credentials is that we come from families from generation to generations to have put a premium upon education and performance. So to say when your child come along, like my daughter who's practicing law now, to come along, there was never a question, are you going to college? The question was, how are you going to do it? Where are you going to get the money and where are you going to go? And what are you going to do once you get there? And that same type of attitude, if you will, I grew up with. I grew up with a father who was basically the youngest son of a group of uncles, all who got they're PhD in mathematics, they're all school teachers and so forth. I had the only father who didn't get anything beyond a high school degree, and father used to tell the story he only got that by having sex with the teachers. You know? And knowing my father, there's probably some truth to it somewhere. The point being is, even with that, his personal background, the attitude by both parents and both parents' families where you were expected to do these things. That's why when Joseph and them came here, one of the things they said they were going to do, the first thing they did, they set up schools. You got a school right up here that her mother, she was telling you, taught at it one time. I've got the lady who's the last teacher still living yet today. I was of the first group that went to integrated schools here. Before that, we had our own. Our own family taught them, trained them, and parents were the enforcers. You went and you did your work, or else you got to whip it at school and you got to whip it when you come home, and you had to do it anyhow. So it was an attitude. It's a value system. And so if you come up with that, you don't, it's kind of like Evelyn said sitting here, you asked her, were they strict? Well, don't know, never thought about it. You were taught to do what you were told, and when you went out there, they were like your parents. Whoever set down the rules, you figured out how to make the rules work for you. You didn't try to break the rules. So we were not, in the sense of being, of the 60s, we were not protesters. We were saying, if you give us lemon, we're going to figure out how to make lemonade. And if lemonade ain't good enough, we'll do something else with it. But we're going to take whatever you give us, and we're going to perform. We're not going to let you define us. We're not going to let you tell us who we are and what we are. We come out, and something else she said was right on point. We always had a place. And what she meant was, we were raised up knowing that we were somebody. We were special, we were important, we were the shakers and makers. We were expected to be the leaders. We were expected to be the politicians. All these families involved politics. Look at Uncle Frank Mill now. He was the JP here, okay? They were a part of the community. My family built the roads here. They had the road construction. They had the 12 or 14 teams of mules and horses that hauled all of the sandstone and so forth out of here. They held the first government jobs with postal service and so forth. Granddad, you asked the question of how they got involved. He was appointed by the President of the United States. They were involved in the politics of the time. If you read the papers of the time, all of our families at the field house at Marietta and so forth, when they had emancipation and so forth, were up there speaking and talking. All the years here in Ohio, when they were running for offices, they needed these folks to support, to bring the vote out, because they controlled their communities. The churches, you know, if you were in this community, you were a blood relative, and you were expected to perform. If it was doing no more than running moonshine, you were supposed to be at the top of your game. That was expected. You know, we say, old Hazel Water Crew. We can talk about Hazel. Hazel taught school, and his brother taught school right out there in Gilbert, actually. They run some of the best moonshine you ever laid your lips on. Right up here in the Holland, as a kid, we used to carry water for them. Now, you laugh at this, but this is a part of the family industries. And everybody in the community expected you to do something to work and be something, and they expect you to be good at it. You know, you didn't produce poor quality liquor, you didn't produce poor quality corn, you didn't produce poor quality children. It's just, that was the norm, and it has been as far back as I can see in the history. So to answer the questions that you asked about social behavior based on today's social thinking, as far as I can see, just don't fit the Barnetts. Now, whether they thought on social thinking is accurate or not, I don't know. But what I do know, it doesn't fit this clan that I come from. Every one of, Ada there, for instance, every one of these people, or her husband, who, you know, was a major writer for Jet and doing the civil rights hearing, these may seem like unimportant type things, but when you think about it, they are part of the shakers and movers of their time. They're at and involved in what is shaping and making the America we live in. That's real important.
During the civil rights movement in the South, did it affect your way of living here in this area?
Oh yes, in a lot of ways. First of all, The civil rights movement and the television movement, news movement, won at the same time. We don't know which, there's a lot of argument which made which. But the fact that you had the ability to communicate what's going on to people of color, to the rest of the people in the world of color, in the space of the United States, has a major impact upon how we started to organize, how we started to think, and some of the demands we started to make that we hadn't made as a unit before. Now, what came out of that can be argued whether it's good or bad. We're not even sure yet today where it landed. My take on it is this. We went into the streets in the 60s and we asked for desegregation. Our leaders and white leaders who divvied up the thing, they gave us integration. They're two different things. And what you do with integration is you take away one party or the other's infrastructure, and that's what they did to the black community. We don't have the same infrastructure in the church we had. We don't have the same schools. We don't even teach our history. We're letting somebody else define us and tell us who we are. We've got kids of color running around acting as if they can be substandard and expect the same treatment that the power structure of the white community gives theirs. And I have pointed out for years that they're more than willing to hire their mediocre workers, mediocre performers. They don't hire ours. And the last one of ours they hire is somebody like me or comes from my family because they will challenge them. They have to compete with them and they can't compete. They haven't yet decided they want to put the energy into it that we have been taught to put from day one. And that's my take on where we're at today.
Do you have time to go to the cemetery? If you don't, I understand.
I suppose if we're going to do it, we need to do it while we still have daylight.
Yeah.
Because,
Is it still raining outside?
I don't think
I don't think so.
so. What I'm thinking is, where's one person could tear down here and put back together. One person can, start backing stuff up here. One person can go with the
I'm gonna
battery.
get something to drink.
and away.
Is that your water
And
over
go
there?
to the-
No, but I'll drink it if I can find it.